Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And it sounds like Nintendo is set to reveal a big expansion for the Nintendo Switch sometime here soon, and fans are certainly very excited about all that, and well, I think they should be. But beyond that, it sounds like they might actually have a little bit more in store for fans, and yeah, we will go over all of that today. Now, unfortunately, though, we do have a bit of bad news as well for the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5, as it sounds like it's going to continue to be very difficult to get these platforms well into 2022. I know a lot of people have been hoping that we would see an improvement here, but well, that actually does not sound like that's going to be the case at all. So we will go over all of that as well. With that said, let's go and get right into the video, starting off with the Disgaea franchise. And this franchise has always been a little bit more on the niche side of things, but consistently they've been really good over the years, whether that be Disgaea 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 that released earlier this year. I think it's an overall enjoyable franchise, and a big reason for that is because their overall stories are very amusing. They don't really take themselves too seriously or anything like that, but they are highly amusing and they just have kind of a charm to them. And well, the good news here is that if you do like the Disgaea franchise, it sounds like you're going to get more Disgaea in the future. Earlier this year, of course, Disgaea 6 did launch for the Nintendo Switch exclusively, but you know, some fans of course was wondering what's going to happen next, and well, they did answer that, and let's just go and check out what they had to say. We just released Disgaea 6, but I'm sure some of you are already wondering what's next for the series. Of course, we're planning to keep it going. Though I can't really talk about when that may be or what it's going to be like yet, we would like to take into account all of the feedback we've received about Disgaea 6 from players in America, Europe, Japan, Asia, and everywhere else, so that we can make sure everyone will enjoy the next one even more. So there you go, it looks like the Disgaea franchise will continue, and better yet, they did also announce that the Disgaea franchise as a whole has now officially sold more than 5 million copies worldwide. Now, for a niche franchise like this, that's actually pretty good. But yeah, yesterday we kind of talked about how Square Enix is planning to continue the Bravely Default franchise, and now here you are seeing Nippon Ichi Software say that they want to continue the Disgaea franchise, so you know what? This is just a good week for JRPG fans. Now, we also have another event to talk about for the month of September, and you know what, really, September is starting to turn out to be a very exciting month. I guess there's E3 for the month of June, and you got Gamescom for August, and then, well, now September, you have a big PlayStation event, there's a rumored Nintendo Direct, and now we also have a big THQ Nordic event. And this one was a little bit of a surprise, but this is THQ Nordic's 10-year anniversary, and it looks like they do have a pretty nice little event planned for September 17th. Jeff Keighley will be hosting this event because, hey, why not? Jeff Keighley's kind of all over the place by this point. But they do plan on announcing 6 completely new games here that includes sequels to beloved games, and some of these games apparently are games that fans have been waiting for decades. So that actually sounds pretty exciting, especially when they say that some of these games, you know, fans have been waiting for decades. I'm not exactly sure what these games are per se, but I mean, if you really start to look into THQ Nordic's IP catalog, I mean, they have a ton of IP. I mean, really, anytime you talk about acquisitions, THQ Nordic is right there. It's very possible that they might have acquired more game studios in the last couple years than anybody else, because they just continuously gobble these studios up. So they do have a lot of studios and they have a lot of IP. So it's kind of hard to tell exactly what will be here. But I mean, just looking through some of their bigger and more popular franchises, I mean, they do have Darkstalkers, they have Destroy All Humans, they do have Red Faction, which has a lot of potential with these next generation consoles and the destructibility in that game. One game that I could see them revealing here, though, would be actually a SpongeBob Rehydrated sequel. They did do a remake of that game here recently, and it performed well for THQ Nordic, so I think that they could follow that success up with a direct sequel to SpongeBob Rehydrated. Now, that is a sequel that fans have been waiting for a very long time, so I think that could be one of the announcements here that, that's just a pure guess. Now, another game, or actually studio in this case, that I would kind of pay attention to would be Warhorse. They did acquire the studio, which works on Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is a fantastic Western style of RPG. It does take a very realistic approach, and it's quite unique for what it is. But, I mean, this game released, I want to say, back in 2018, so I'd be interested to see what their next game is, and hey, maybe they could possibly announce that here. Again, this is all just speculation, but yeah, I think that this is an event that you should be paying attention to. I think that there's going to be some interesting announcements made here, and again, that will take place on September 17th. As always, though, of course, I will keep you up to date with anything interesting that does happen there. Next up, though, let's talk about Nintendo, because it looks like the Nintendo Switch, or Nintendo Switch Online actually, is going to be receiving a big expansion sometime here soon. Now, we did talk about this earlier this week, but Nintendo Life did report that they had heard from their sources that Nintendo Switch Online was going to be expanding sometime here soon to include Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. Now, that would be incredibly exciting because, Game Boy and Game Boy Color has a very large library of not just games, but really good games. I mean, that's where the Pokemon franchise originated from. You have Pokemon Blue, Red, Yellow, Crystal, Silver, Gold. All these games are available on Game Boy. So those games could potentially head over to Nintendo Switch Online if this does indeed happen. You also have several Zelda games, including Zelda Oracle of Ages. There's the Oracle of Seasons. You also have Link's Awakening. I mean, yes, Game Boy and Game Boy Color has some excellent games available on those platforms. And really, I have to say for myself, Game Boy is very possibly the console that got me so interested in gaming in the first place. Now, I had played games well before ever touching a Game Boy, but really it was the original Pokemon games that just kind of captivated me so much as a child, and I think that's what started my love for gaming in general. It all just kind of starts there, so I would love to see these come over to Nintendo Switch Online with some added online features for that matter. But that's kind of the important thing to keep in mind here, because as of this moment, this is all just a rumor for the time being. However, this is still an ongoing story, and actually, Eurogamer has now come out and corroborated that Nintendo Life report by saying that they've heard from their own sources that yes, they've also heard that Game Boy and Game Boy Color games are set to come to Nintendo Switch Online. But not only that, because it actually gets better, Eurogamer has also heard other platforms that have not leaked yet are also on the cards. So that means not only could we get Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, but we could also see some other platforms, maybe such as Game Boy Advance. That one seems like a very real possibility. You have the Nintendo 64, that would be huge, or even possibly GameCube. I don't know if they would do GameCube or not, but yeah, I think that if they do another platform, Game Boy Advance would make the most sense. If you somehow got Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games all on Nintendo Switch Online, that would actually be huge. Game Boy Advance has a massive library of games, and as I just said earlier this week, Game Boy Advance games have aged incredibly well thanks to the art style that they employed. So that would be great, and I actually think that all three of these platforms makes a lot of sense right now for Nintendo Switch. Nintendo is celebrating multiple big anniversaries this year. You have Pokemon 25th anniversary, you got Metroid's 35th, you got Donkey Kong's 40th, and you also got Zelda's 35th. And Game Boy and Game Boy Advance has some really good games from all of these franchises. And would it not be just massive to get all of these games onto Nintendo Switch Online for their anniversaries? I mean, really, even if you take a look at Metroid Dread, which is coming to the Nintendo Switch next month, there's a lot of interest in the 2D Metroid franchise right now. But unfortunately, a lot of people who own the Nintendo Switch doesn't have a good way of playing these older 2D Metroid games. But if they had Game Boy and Game Boy Advance available on Nintendo Switch Online, you could suddenly bring over Metroid Fusion and Metroid Zero Mission. Yeah, in an ideal world, it makes a lot of sense. But per usual, and it's always important to keep in mind, for the time being, this is just a rumor and is not confirmed until Nintendo officially announces something. If we learned anything from last year, the Nintendo Switch Pro everybody was talking about this thing. This thing had leaked all over the place. And well, guess what? We don't have a Nintendo Switch Pro. We do have the Switch OLED, which is great for handheld gaming. But, in general, we don't have the Switch Pro, which, apparently leaked all over the place. So keep that in mind when you hear rumors like this. Moving on, though, unfortunately, we do have a bit of bad news for fans still looking for that Xbox Series or the PlayStation 5. One thing that has been very prominent this generation is short supply for these consoles. Of course, it works two ways. We have this incredibly high demand for these next generation consoles, so these consoles, they get bought up quick, and unfortunately, Microsoft and Sony, they just don't have the resources to put enough consoles out there to reach demand fast enough. So this has been an ongoing problem all generation, and even though these consoles are nearly a year old, they still sell out pretty much immediately. And well, the bad news here is that problem looks like it could persist well into 2022 or really even into 2023. Yeah, the situation is looking pretty dire right now, and this all stems around the semiconductor shortage. This is something that not just console makers are dealing with, but really all kinds of different electronics. Car manufacturers are having major problems, and this is just a really big issue as of this moment. And now, according to Toshiba, they're actually warning that this shortage could last well into 2022, and in fact, they're saying right around September or maybe even into 2023. Now, they do also very specifically mention game consoles. So let's just go and check out what they had to say. The supply of chips will remain very tight until at least September next year. In some cases, we may find some customers not being fully served until 2023. And then later on, Toshiba was asked about how they allocate its limited output, and this is what they said. We consider which customers faces the most severe situation, such as the risk of the whole production line halting or the business getting obliterated without the supply of chips. Game console makers are among the customers making the strongest demands, and I'm sincerely sorry for their frustration as none of them have a 100% satisfaction. So with that in mind, it does sound like that they're trying to allocate more components to these game manufacturers than maybe some other style of businesses, but at the same time, it still sounds like we're going to continue to see these shortages for quite some time. Now, does that mean that these game consoles will continue to sell out until late 2022 or even into 2023? And that's kind of a different question, because as I mentioned before, there's two things happening here with the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5. One, you do have this shortage, and because of that, they can't necessarily make these consoles fast enough, but at the same time, there's also this incredibly high demand. Over time, though, with more of these consoles selling, we should get closer and closer to meeting that initial demand. And once that initial demand is met, these consoles might not sell out as fast as what they have been, and they could be more readily available. Now, when will that initial demand be met? That's kind of the big question right now. It certainly is not going to be this year, because now we're heading into the holiday season. These consoles will definitely be selling out throughout the holiday season, but maybe after that holiday rush, maybe we could start to see an improvement then. It's kind of hard to predict as of this moment, but unfortunately it does sound like shortages could last well into 2022, and that's not what you want to hear. And on to our final topic of the day, we got an update for that Crysis Remastered Trilogy. This Remastered Trilogy was teased earlier this year for PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and even the Nintendo Switch. It's still kind of almost hard to believe that Crysis, which is very well known for how demanding it is on hardware, yeah, you're going to be able to play these games on the Nintendo Switch. That's pretty awesome. But the good news here is that we did get a release date for this Remastered Trilogy, and you're not going to have to wait too long. Crysis Remastered Trilogy will launch on October 15th. Now, on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, this game will run at 4K 60 frames per second, and it will have improved lighting and high-resolution textures. So the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5 is going to be a great option to play these games. And due to just how good these games have always looked, I really think that they still look good even all these years later. So I think the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series is going to be a great place to play these games. Interestingly enough, though, it does sound like this Crysis Trilogy will be an only digital title. That's really unfortunate because I feel like a lot of people would have really enjoyed a physical copy, especially for the people who has a strong affiliation for the Crysis franchise. I guess it is what it is, but it will be available for $50, and they also allow you to buy Crysis 2 and Crysis 3 separately for $30 each. So it does sound like they're covering all grounds in terms of digital. There will also be a physical Switch version later on. Regardless, if you do like the Crysis franchise, or if you just like first-person shooters in general, keep an eye out for Crysis Remastered Trilogy, which launches on October 15th. Let's go ahead and take a look at the poll of the day, though, and we do have that big PlayStation showcase taking place next week on Thursday. Very excited about that event. I mean, it's been a little while since we've gotten a big PlayStation event, and this event potentially could have some big announcements here. And that's why I went ahead and asked you all, what PlayStation game would you most like to see gameplay of at the PlayStation September showcase? And unsurprisingly here, God of War Ragnarok was the overwhelming leader at 60%. I kind of figured that would be the case because, I mean, God of War Last Generation was absolutely outstanding. I always say that God of War for the PlayStation 4 was one of the most perfect single-player games that I've ever played. It had a phenomenal story, well-written characters, it was well voice-acted, the gameplay was excellent, it had a great world to explore with that hub world. It was really just the whole package. I mean, it was just an excellent overall single-player game, and I almost actually find that to be kind of amusing because if you ask me about the original God of War trilogy, I thought that those games were fun, but I didn't really care for the story in those games at all. In fact, as a character, I didn't really care for Kratos at all. He was just always angry at everything. And yeah, I wasn't big into the original trilogy, but then here comes this new game, and then all of a sudden, they make Kratos into a sympathetic character. It was just a complete 180, and what an absolute fantastic game. But I know I, as well as many other fans out there, they want to see how they follow up such a masterpiece with God of War Ragnarok. I guess we'll just have to kind of wait and see on that, but I hope we get a big gameplay reveal of this game here sometime soon, and hopefully even at that PlayStation showcase. Now, with that said, I would also really like to see more on Final Fantasy 16. I am a big Final Fantasy fan, and Final Fantasy 16 is really intriguing to me, especially with some of the Final Fantasy 14 team working on that. A lot of people think that Final Fantasy 14 stories are just some of the best Final Fantasy games, period. So I would really like to see what they could do with Final Fantasy 16, but I'm not completely convinced that that will be at this event. I'm going to cross my fingers for it, but I'm not going to be surprised if it's not here based off of some of Square Enix's most recent statements about Final Fantasy 16. It sounds like they're probably going to wait closer to release before showing that game again, but who knows? They might come out and surprise us. Regardless, I'm definitely going to be tuning in for that PlayStation showcase next week. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.